Alright, so y'all want Kiss? I'ma give y'all what you want today. Paul Stanley's at it again, and I hate to be the guy to be pointing this stuff out, but we got some more Paul Stanley baloney coming at ya. Kiss fans, you might be aware that the band called it quits last December with their final show at Madison Square Garden after almost 50 years. They played their final show, and they finished it off by introducing their new NPCs, their computer-generated avatars that met with a tepid response, to be generous, by Kiss fans. Haven't really heard much about the NPCs since then. Don't really know what's going on with that. But as far as the band members, Gene Simmons wasted no time putting a solo band together. He's back out on the road. As far as Tommy and Eric, don't know what they're doing right now, if they're playing music or if maybe they're just enjoying their retirement. As far as Paul Stanley goes, it appears that he may be missing the limelight already because don't know much what's going on with him as far as on the music front. Don't think he's got much going on. Don't know if he's got a Soul Station record in the works, his soul cover band. Maybe his voice is just so shot at this point that doing anything musically beyond lip syncing the old Kiss songs might be out of the question. I don't know, maybe you could call Michael McDonald up and they could do another soul covers album, duets or something like that. But it appears Paul Stanley seems to be missing the limelight because he recently did an interview a few weeks back with Gibson Guitars, a 90-minute interview that they posted on YouTube to geek out about his vintage guitar collection. I don't know if you watched this thing, but as far as the collection goes, it turns out that it's mostly just a bunch. Now, I'm not a guitar expert. I play a little bit of guitar. I don't really own any expensive vintage guitars. I love music. I love playing guitar. I'm not a virtuoso. I'm not even really that good, but I'm into it a little bit. Know a little bit about guitars, not a lot about vintage guitars, but it turns out the collection turns out to be a bunch of 90s reissues. His vintage guitars were a bunch of 90s reissues from Gibson. He had a 59 Les Paul Standard. He had a 57 Les Paul Gold Top Conversion. But he's got a couple of 90s reissues, which he starts off the interview with, and you can tell the interviewer was kind of like WTF when Paul starts pulling out these 90s reissues. Like, this is the vintage guitar collection? But there were a couple of gems in there. His 77 Ibanez PS10, his cracked mirror prototype. There were a couple cool things in there, but when he comes out of the gate busting out some 90s reissues, it's kind of like, what the fuck, Paul? But anyways, let's get to the baloney bullshit part of this thing. Because Paul Stanley, it's funny because in some of the comments, people are talking about, oh, Paul is such a humble guy. It's so nice to see him, without all the band drama. Some guy says, watching him just geek out about guitars like the rest of us is why we love this channel. Okay, so for people like this guy that made this comment, I'm going to drop some truth bomb on you right now. Paul Stanley is not into guitars and gear. In fact, he has disdain for musicians who want to talk about guitars and gear. He said as much in his memoir, Face the Music, which was published back in 2014, about 10 years ago. He said, and I quote, "Musicians bored me with talk of gear and guitars." So he says, musicians bored me with talk of gear and guitars. So this guy does not sound like the guitar geek he's portraying himself to be in this Gibson interview. My guess is Paul was getting a little bored. He was out of the limelight for a few months. He saw Gene Simmons out on the road. And he thought he's got to get his piece of it. So when Gibson came calling, or maybe he called Gibson, I don't know, or maybe they offered him some money to do this 90-minute conversation. But when you think about a 90-minute video, my guess is that he probably spent the entire day with Gibson at least to get the 90 minutes of footage they culled for the video. But Paul Stanley is not a gearhead, okay? He looks down upon people who are into gear and guitars. In fact, something else he said in that same memoir, at 2014 publication date, here's what he says. He says, "One afternoon, I asked Kenny Ortega, the choreographer we had used on the Dynasty tour, to drop by. I handed him a suitcase and told him, quote unquote, take whatever you want. I sold my collection of vintage guitars, the entire batch, to a dealer for $50,000. He says, he goes on to say, they no longer meant anything to me. Luckily, my life turned out all right, and the decision doesn't haunt me. Now, this is 2014, okay? Back in 2014, he says, because that collection is worth about $2.5 million today. So that would have been 10 years ago. I don't know how much the value of that collection would have gone up. So apparently what Paul, the stuff that Paul pulled out for this Gibson thing is just a bunch of junk he accrued in the aftermath of selling that vintage guitar collection back in the day for 50 grand. I don't know when that would have been, if that would have been the late 70s or what. But, so yeah, here's Paul Stanley. More phony baloney bullshit. Hey, I'm Mr. Gear Guy. I'm Mr. Guitar Guy. Yeah, I'll talk to you for 90 minutes about guitars, even though musicians bore the hell out of me when they want to talk about gear and guitars. So I just wanted to touch on this again. Paul Stanley's the gift that keeps on giving, and I hate to be the guy always pointing this kind of stuff out, but it really made me laugh when I saw Paul Stanley grasping for the spotlight once again, putting on a face of, oh yeah, I'm a guitar gear guy. But anyway, I hope you dug the video, and we'll see you next time. Who's here?